Have you ever made a decision so selfless, so heartwarming, that you didn't expect anything in return, but life surprised you in the most unbelievable way? This is the story of a young nurse whose kind gesture changed everything for her. At just 26, Emma was like many of us, working hard, trying to make a difference in the world, and living her life day by day. But one act of kindness, one moment of empathy for a patient, would soon lead her to a shocking discovery that would leave her questioning everything she thought she knew about the world and about herself. It all started on a regular Wednesday shift at the hospital where Emma worked. She had seen her fair share of patients, each with their own struggles. But there was something about Mr. Harris that stood out to her. He was an elderly man in his 70s, quiet, frail, and in desperate need of a major surgery. He had been on the waiting list for months, and time was running out. Without the procedure, his health would only continue to deteriorate, and there was a chance he wouldn't survive much longer. But like so many others in the healthcare system, Mr. Harris couldn't afford the surgery. He didn't have the money, and his insurance wouldn't cover the full cost. Emma knew the hospital's policy and had seen patients fall through the cracks before. But something about Mr. Harris struck her deeply. As a nurse, Emma had always been the kind of person to go above and beyond for her patients. She wasn't just about administering medicine or checking vitals. She genuinely cared. But this was different. The thought of Mr. Harris suffering, unable to get the help he needed because of financial barriers, broke her heart. So, in a moment of deep empathy, she made an extraordinary decision. With a little bit of her own savings and a lot of determination, Emma paid for his surgery out of her own pocket. It wasn't a small sum. This was a life-or-death situation, and the surgery would cost thousands of dollars. But Emma didn't hesitate. She simply couldn't stand the thought of someone, especially someone so vulnerable, being denied the care they deserved. Days passed, and the surgery was a success. Mr. Harris was recovering well, and Emma felt a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before. She knew she had done something right. She had changed someone's life, given them a second chance, and that, in itself, was worth everything. She didn't expect a reward, and honestly, she didn't want one. For her, it was just part of the job. The very reason she became a nurse, in the first place. But then, something happened that Emma could never have imagined. She went about her usual routine, not expecting anything extraordinary to come of it. But when she checked her bank account a few days later, her heart skipped a beat. There, sitting in her account, was a deposit. A large one. It wasn't a mistake. It was real. A six-figure sum had just appeared. Out of nowhere. How could this be? She hadn't won any lottery. She didn't remember transferring that amount of money herself. Confused and stunned, Emma checked the details. The source of the deposit. It was from an anonymous sender. Her first instinct was disbelief. This had to be some sort of error. But as she looked at the transaction again, something strange stirred within her. She couldn't ignore it. Could this be connected to the surgery she had paid for? Could it somehow be linked to Mr. Harris, the elderly patient whose life she had saved? The more she thought about it, the more questions piled up. Who could have sent her this money, and why? Was this a coincidence? Or was there something more going on beneath the surface? To make matters even more mysterious, Emma's phone rang just moments after she discovered the deposit. The number was unfamiliar, but when she answered, the voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. "Thank you for your kindness," the voice said, cryptic and soft. "You've done something remarkable. Don't worry, everything will be explained soon." Emma's mind raced. What was going on? Who was this person? Why did they know what she had done? And how was it that they knew about the deposit? Could it be a prank? Or was there something even bigger at play here? As the voice on the other end continued to speak, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something far greater than a simple act of kindness. This was just the beginning of a story that was about to take an unexpected turn. The questions kept coming, each more baffling than the last. As the days went by, Emma couldn't rest. She tried to go on with her life as usual, but the mystery surrounding the deposit haunted her every waking moment. Who was behind this? Why had they chosen her? And what would happen next? Emma's world, once simple and predictable, was now filled with uncertainty and intrigue. She couldn't help but wonder, was she being watched? Was there someone with enough resources and power to track her every move? And if so, what was their end game? What started as a kind act of selflessness had now turned into a puzzle she couldn't solve. The mystery deepened, and with every passing day, the stakes grew higher. Emma's journey was about to lead her down a path she could never have foreseen, one that would change her life forever. But as she stood on the precipice of this strange new reality, she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. This wasn't just about helping a patient anymore. It was about something much bigger, and the shocking deposit in her bank account was only the beginning. Emma couldn't stop thinking about the strange phone call. The voice on the other end of the line had sounded so calm, almost reassuring, but that only made it more unnerving. Everything will be explained soon. What did that even mean? Who was this person? And more importantly, why did they know about her, about the surgery, the money, the decision she had made to help Mr. Harris? She had been trying to do the right thing, just following her instincts, but now everything seemed so much more complicated. Days passed, and Emma tried to push the mystery to the back of her mind, but it wasn't easy. Every time she opened her bank app, she saw that large deposit sitting there, still there, a reminder that something beyond her comprehension had just happened. She started asking around the hospital, trying to find out if anyone else had experienced anything like this, if any of her colleagues had ever received an unexpected windfall or a mysterious call, but no one had. Everyone seemed too wrapped up in their own world, too busy with their own lives. It was as if she was the only one this was happening to. The feeling of isolation grew. Emma couldn't talk to her family about it. They wouldn't understand. Her friends had their own issues, and she didn't want to burden them. So, she turned inward, trying to make sense of the situation herself. Could it be that someone had taken notice of her good deed and wanted to reward her? Maybe it was someone from a charity or even a wealthy donor who had heard about her act of kindness and wanted to thank her in some way. But even as she entertained these thoughts, she knew deep down that it wasn't that simple. There had to be more to this. The mystery deepened when Emma received another message. This time, it was a text. "You've done something extraordinary, but you've also become part of something much bigger than you realize. There's more at stake here than just your kindness." The message was anonymous, like the first one, but this time, the sender included a link. It led to a news article about a powerful healthcare corporation that had recently been exposed for exploiting vulnerable patients, charging them exorbitant amounts for life-saving procedures. It had been a huge scandal, but the company's leadership had managed to keep things under wraps. Until now. Emma's stomach churned as she read the article. Could there be a connection between what she had done and this corrupt healthcare system? She'd never heard of this corporation before, but something in the back of her mind made her think it was more than just a coincidence. She remembered the patients she'd seen over the years, people who couldn't afford their medical bills, who were forced to choose between getting the care they needed or going into crippling debt. She thought about Mr. Harris, how he had been put on a long waiting list because of his inability to pay, how she had stepped in to help him. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but Emma didn't like where it was leading. Could her good deed have stirred something dangerous? Had she unwittingly become part of a larger battle, one she didn't even know about? And who were these people who were watching her every move, guiding her down this path? She needed answers. The tension grew as Emma continued to dig deeper. She contacted her bank, trying to trace the mysterious deposit. They couldn't provide her with any details about the source, citing privacy regulations. She even went to the police, but they brushed her off, telling her it was likely a mistake or a glitch in the system. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker was at play. Her relationship with Mr. Harris, the patient she had helped, was starting to feel strained too. He had called her a few times to thank her for saving his life, but he seemed distant, almost evasive. He was still recovering, and Emma tried to visit him during her shifts, but something about his behavior seemed off. He would look at her strangely, like he was holding something back. Once, when she asked him if he had heard anything about the money or the mysterious messages, he just shook his head and avoided her gaze. A growing sense of unease gnawed at Emma. It was clear that there were forces at work behind the scenes. But what were they? And how could she stop herself from being caught up in whatever was happening? As the days passed, Emma's anxiety reached a boiling point. She had started to feel like she was being watched. Someone was following her, sending cryptic messages, leaving strange gifts at her door. But when she tried to confront the situation, every lead seemed to evaporate into thin air. The people she thought she could trust were becoming increasingly unhelpful or downright evasive. The mystery was tightening around her like a vice. Then, one evening, as Emma returned home from a long shift, she found a package waiting for her on her doorstep. It was an unmarked box, nothing out of the ordinary, except for the fact that it had no return address. She hesitated for a moment before picking it up, her heart racing. What now? What more could they possibly want from her? She opened the box, and inside there was a letter. The handwriting was elegant, yet the words were chilling. You've made a choice. Now you must live with it. They are watching, and so are we. It's time to make your move. Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. Who was they? And what did this all mean? She couldn't go on like this anymore. The weight of the situation was unbearable. She needed to know the truth. She had to find out what she had gotten herself into. But just as she was about to take action, her phone rang again. It was another unknown number. With trembling hands, she answered. Do you want to know what's really going on, Emma? The voice said, low and measured. Because if you do, there's no turning back. You've already made your choice, but the consequences are far greater than you realize. Your next move will determine everything. Her pulse quickened. She was in too deep now. There was no turning back. Emma's heart raced as she heard those final words on the phone. Her mind spun with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Your next move will determine everything. What could that possibly mean? She had already made the decision to help Mr. Harris, to pay for his surgery out of her own pocket. But now it seemed like that one act of kindness had set off a chain of events she couldn't control. Everything was spiraling out of her hands. She looked around her apartment, the silence almost suffocating. What was she supposed to do now? Was she really being watched? She couldn't ignore the feeling that someone had been observing her every move for days, every phone call, every text message, every strange package. It was all connected, but who was behind it, and why? The answer came suddenly, like a bolt of lightning. Emma remembered something something Mr. Harris had said to her during one of their last conversations. It had seemed like a passing remark at the time, but now it took on new meaning. He had thanked her for saving his life, but then, with a knowing look in his eyes, he had added, "You've done more than you know." At the time, she thought he was just being grateful, but now she realized it wasn't just gratitude. Mr. Harris had known more than he was letting on. Without wasting another second, Emma made her way back to the hospital. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. She found Mr. Harris in his recovery room, his frail body propped up in bed, looking surprisingly alert. He greeted her with a weak smile, but there was something different about him now. It was like a weight had lifted off his shoulders, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. "Mr. Harris," she began, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I need to know what's really going on. Why did you thank me in that way? What's happening? What have I gotten myself into?" He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and something else, something darker. Then he sighed deeply and looked down at his hands, as if gathering the strength to speak. "Emma," he said slowly, "you've done more than just help me. You've unwittingly become part of a plan to expose something much bigger than either of us could have imagined." Her breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? What plan?" Mr. Harris swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm not just any patient. I wasn't just some elderly man in need of surgery. I'm part of a network, a group of people who have been fighting back against a powerful healthcare corporation. This company, this organization, they've been exploiting patients like me for years, charging ridiculous amounts of money for life-saving treatments. I've been working with others like me to expose their corruption, but we needed a way to bring attention to it." Emma's world spun. The pieces were finally falling into place. The mysterious deposit, the cryptic messages, the strange phone calls. It was all connected. "But why me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why did you choose me?" "I just wanted to help." He nodded gravely. "You didn't choose it, but when you paid for my surgery, you unknowingly became part of our movement. You gave us the leverage we needed to make our voices heard. And now those people, those powerful people, know what you've done. They know you're involved." The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had been part of something much bigger than she ever imagined, and the consequences of that act of kindness were far-reaching. But it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something much more important. "I didn't know it would lead to this," she said softly, her voice breaking. "But now that I do, what do I do?" Mr. Harris met her gaze. "You keep going. You've already started this fight, and now you can't stop. You've exposed them, and they'll stop at nothing to silence you. But together, we can make sure they don't get away with it. You have a choice now, Emma. You can either let them intimidate you into backing down, or you can stand with us and make sure the truth comes out." Emma took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had never wanted to be caught up in something like this. She had just wanted to help someone who was in need, someone who was vulnerable. But now, she realized that her small act of kindness had led to something bigger than herself. A fight for justice, for fairness, for people who were being mistreated by a system that was supposed to protect them. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. But one thing was clear. She couldn't turn back. She couldn't walk away from the truth now. As Emma left the hospital that day, she felt a sense of resolve settle in her chest. She wasn't alone in this anymore. She had allies, people who had been fighting this battle for years, people who were just as determined as she was to make a difference. The road ahead would be difficult, and there would be risks, but she knew what she had to do. And as she walked out into the bright afternoon sun, Emma realized something important. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change the course of everything. She had chosen to help one person, but now she was part of something much bigger, something that would bring the truth to light, something that would make sure the people who had been hurt by the system would finally have a voice. The journey wasn't over yet, but Emma knew one thing for sure. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a fighter for justice. And this was just the beginning.